Thanks, Chandri. I'm Laura Lander, social work faculty in the Department of Behavioral Medicine and Psychiatry. So good to see everybody today. Back by popular demand, we have a panel discussion today. We had one similar last year at the end of our ECHO series. This is kind of at the beginning of our ECHO series. And I wanted to go ahead and introduce the panelists. There's no way to have them up in the front of the room as we might normally do. I'm going to do a little bit of a PowerPoint background before we do the panel, just to build context into our discussion today. So I'm going to just quickly introduce our panelists. And once we start the panel, if you guys want to say more about yourselves, I'm happy to do that. I just want people to know who you are in what square. So Charity Ramsey is on our panel, and she's kind of a community member who's going to participate in our panel discussing experiences with Child Protective Services and the system that people move through. And then Preston Lee, so PJ, is also one of our panelists. If you want to wave or something, PJ, so people know who you are. It's not hard because you might be one of the few males in a square. Oh, Gregory's here too. And PJ is also a community member on the panel. And then Jennifer Stevens is kind of representing the legal side of things. So she can answer legal questions related to CPS processes and her own experience as a prosecutor. And then Brianna Cunningham is a CPS supervisor. So she can also answer direct questions from the audience. I have some questions in mind that I'll probably pose to the panel, but this is really meant to be a discussion. And one of our goals with the CPS and Family Law ECHO is really to bring people from all different perspectives together to talk about shared goals and improved communication and how do we improve systems for everyone so that those primary goals, I think of the primary goals as child safety and reunification, get achieved to the best of our abilities. So thank you guys for being here and being willing to be on the panel. All right, I'm going to share my screen. So I'm going to just breeze through these slides and they'll be sent out to everyone here for further review. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because I think the panel is really the most important thing today. So we'll talk briefly about WV numbers just to get a sense of what those look like, identify the common goals for everyone in our community with regard to Child Protective Services involvement, and then the panel discussion about people's experiences and recommendations from the panelists and anyone else about how to improve our systems. So just some context, about 83% of open CPS cases involve substance use disorders. So this is the main reason for CPS involvement. We have seen this change over time, and with the opioid epidemic, this has increased significantly. So now it's really the main reason. It didn't used to be. Coordination of services is really, really important for prompt reunification, and we know that doesn't always happen as quickly as parents want it to, and that can be really frustrating for parents involved with the system, and there are different reasons why that occurs, including barriers like time, high caseloads, lack of kind of releases of information so that people can talk to each other, trust, understanding of addiction, including relapse, and then participant compliance with services, so parents complying with services. And multiple things can get in the way of that. There is something called an MDT, as many of you guys know, so a multidisciplinary treatment group that's supposed to meet often monthly with all of the players involved that can serve as a platform for effective communication. So there was a report put out in 2003, which is really interesting, and I provided the link to it, that really talks about some of the specific West Virginia numbers and does make recommendations. So in particular, there are 4 times as many foster children per capita in West Virginia than in other states, and 13 children in foster care per 100 per 1,000 children. So we have high rates of children being removed from families and in foster care. The other statistics that's interesting is West Virginia terminates parental rights more often than any other state and more quickly. I am not presuming to know or say why that is. So it's just kind of an interesting statistic. And is that something that should be changed, could be changed, or what might be the drivers behind it? We don't know that part. We do know that the majority of children who enter into foster care placements do so because of parental substance use. And that also correlates with poverty. So we know that West Virginia is a state that has a lot of children living in poverty. Just wanted to provide the code. So this is the legislative code related to parental substance use in the context of neglect and abuse. So this is the number, and the quote kind of extracted from it is the parent, guardian, or custodian's abuse of alcohol or drugs or other controlled substances, as defined by this particular code, is impairment. So impairment of parenting skills and ability to keep their kids safe, not just the presence of substance use. So sometimes that gets conflated, that just because someone is using substances, it means they are unable to care for their children. Sometimes that is true, but it is not always true. So impairment gets assessed, not just presence or absence of substance use. These are some numbers as to where people are. Good news is there are fewer kids in foster care today than in 2020. We hit really a high during COVID. And while overdose deaths were really high in the state, and opioid use disorder was very high in the state. So these numbers are beginning to come down, which is great. And then you can see kind of where kids generally are in the foster care system. So to me, and people can offer alternative perspectives, these are really the common goals that I think families and the legal system and child protective services all share, which is child safety and the goal of reunification. The reality is sometimes these two goals are in conflict, where reunification can't happen at the same time as child safety. And that's where CPS, I mean, that's really CPS's job to assess that as I see it. This is a little bit about the process of an initial report, child removal. Just wanted to kind of put this in there with a resource to look at. This is a great resource. I look at this with some frequency to know how many kids are currently in placement in a given month in West Virginia. This is also where I got some of the numbers about the workforce shortages with Child Protective Services. They have updates on those on a monthly basis. So it's a good link. All right. Any comments or general questions before we get into the panel?
I wanted to just make say one thing about the substance abuse alone not being enough to justify a removal or to find quote unquote abuse or neglect. It actually can be, per West Virginia Supreme Court. There's case law that says that particularly methamphetamine or fentanyl use alone is sufficient. So if a court makes a finding that a parent has used certain substances that are just known to drastically impair one's ability to function, that can be enough to substantiate and adjudicate.
Thank you, Jen, for that correction and clarification. Is that reflected in the law anywhere?
Reflected in a number of Supreme Court cases. Okay. So when you look at statutes, like when you're doing a legal analysis, statutes and statutory law can be sufficient legal basis, but Supreme Court opinions are just as good of law as a statute. So, which is why everybody cares about the United States Supreme Court so much. Our West Virginia Supreme Court, similarly situated, particularly when it comes to interpreting statute, they can interpret things, and that's one of the things that's been interpreted and is sound law.
Thank you. So one of the questions I had for Brianna and Jennifer is, what is the general timeline from removal of a child, if it's deemed necessary to remove a child from parental custody, to reunification? What's kind of the hope or the general timeline, just so this group understands that?
I mean, the hope really is that the child isn't removed. The hope is that we have enough resources to pull from, whether those be formal or informal. I know in Mon County and across the state, we rely heavily on family members, neighbors, um, people within the school system that want to help, um, members of churches, just really any supports that we can pull from to try to help with things like supervision or childcare when families are struggling. It's really hard to nail down a time frame um, to tell people to expect. Um, in our cases, I mean, we're offering improvement periods in the vast majority of cases whenever it's in court. And we have to have sufficient reason to be denying these improvement periods as we should. We shouldn't go straight to termination unless we have a situation that is so serious, sexual abuse, severe physical abuse, things of that nature. Um, there are certain timeframes that we have to look at if reunification hasn't occurred. So if a child is in foster care 15 out of 22 months, the department has to seek termination of parental rights, except for in certain situations where we feel that it's not in the child's best interest, or if the child is placed with a family member, and we take those things into consideration. But once we hit that 15-month mark, we are really getting down to the wire.
And I just want to clarify. So I can speak as to historically, policy. I no longer am a prosecutor and haven't been for, I don't know, 9 months. So I'm going to defer to Brianna to say anything that's current that may have changed since I left. I can certainly say historically what those things are. But on the time frame, I also want to point out people want to have a time frame. They want to say, okay, if you took my kids in October, if I do what you tell me to do, when do I get them back? And they want to know, is that going to be May or June or whatever? That can't be done. Just like I know a lot of people here work in a medical setting. If you get a cancer diagnosis, there's no way that your doctor can say, if you do all of the treatments that we recommend, you will be cancer free in such and such months. It's the same thing in a court case with CPS, because it really, even if a parent does everything they're supposed to, the reunification really tracks the progress of the child. So if it's a newborn, that's probably more predictable, that if a parent does everything that they're supposed to do, that's going to be more predictable as to they're going to get their child back in a certain time. If we're talking about a child who's old enough to have memories of trauma and they're in therapy and they have siblings and they're having their own behavioral issues or whatever, that can change the pace of reunification, because even though a parent's done what they're supposed to do, it may not be in that child's best interest to go back home when they're still processing trauma. And so I'm sure Brianna can speak to this very eloquently. I've seen a lot of cases where a parent has done everything that they're supposed to do, but the child's treatment team with therapists and doctors and whomever says you can't send this child home yet. They're not in a place to be able to live with this parent yet. And that's really unfortunate, but it's also something that the court system can't control.
You both for the clarification. I know I often hear from parents, and so I'm very familiar with the perspective of the parents, and not as familiar with CPS and kind of the legal side. So this is for Charity and PJ. So when you think about that, the general timeline that Jennifer and Brianna talked about, like 15 to 22 months kind of, or in general, 18 to months to 2 years. How does that match up with recovery and your guys' experience with the recovery process for parents who have substance use disorders?
Charity. Mine was a little bit different. Mine was 6 months. I had him back at temporary at 5 and permanently at 6. And like I was in recovery. I went straight in like a week after my oldest got taken. I was pregnant, and I did everything I was supposed to. I didn't make up excuses. I walked a mile to do a drug test one way and a mile back. I didn't miss nothing. And I advocated for myself. If I had a question or needed something, I'd call. And it seemed to work out. And in the beginning, there was like a stigma with it because I was a drug addict. I used fentanyl at that. And I could tell they treated me with stigma. But then once I started doing everything and they realized, like, I'm going to stick with this, I'm doing good. Like, they seemed to lighten up on me a lot. And as for the recovery process, like, I went into treatment right away, became part of the COATS program. And I'm not gonna lie, like I relapsed after I finished the process. I did. And now, I have 2 years and 9 months clean. But it's just a part of recovery. And luckily, I was able to get through the process before I had my relapse. And it was just for the recovery process, it's a process. It takes a long time. But I also don't think that should deter from getting your kids back. So.
Thank you. Yeah, recovery is a lifetime process. I'd argue. Yeah. Thanks, Charity.
And speaking from my own personal experience, I was in inpatient treatment for 6 months, and then went to sober living for 18 months after that. So that one's kind of, I also work with folks. I'm a peer recovery support specialist, so I work with these folks a lot, and that recovery process is really different for everybody. Uh, and that's kind of what makes it difficult sometimes for the people that I serve. Like in my case, my rights were already terminated by the time I got to treatment because I was incarcerated. So my case was a little more complicated by a lot of other things, legal issues and things like that. But for some of the folks that I work with, they might be in treatment for that entire 15 months. And that makes it harder for them because, the court looks at it as, okay, they don't have stable housing. Just like in sober living, your children can't move back with you when you're in sober living, because that's not, it's a group-based setting. So that makes it that deadline makes it a lot harder for some people that need that extra length of treatment, because I think that was essential for me to get to the point that I'm at today is to have that extra time to work on me. Otherwise, I really truly believe that I wouldn't be where I'm at and be the person that I am today uh, had I not taken that time, and and if my rights hadn't been terminated, I would have far exceeded that deadline that the state has for that. Uh, so I don't know that even being in treatment, uh, the route that I went, if I would have been able to get my children back.
And I think I can imagine that that can be a deterrent or a very difficult decision for parents because they feel like they're choosing between their recovery and their children. And what most people in long-term stable recovery know is recovery has to come before everything, including your children, or you're not going to be able to have your children anyway. So it sets up, a really difficult choice. So just for Jennifer and Brianna, how is long-term treatment or incarceration configured into decision-making with CPS and the courts
I,
about rights?
oh, I had already unmuted myself because I was gonna say, so I can't speak for every county in the state. And I think that that's important to point out that each individual county and each individual judge is going to treat these cases differently. And I know we're not at this portion of the panel, but that's my personal pet peeve with the system is that we do not have uniformity. And I think that that's a massive problem for everyone involved in the system from top to bottom. But with that being said, every county that I've personally worked in, which has mostly been Monongalia County, but I've also worked in a number of other counties in the state. If a parent is in the position of PJ, where they do 6 months of inpatient, then they go into sober living and they're there for an extended period of time, every judge that I have worked with is going to keep giving that parent time as long as they're remaining in treatment. Now, I want to caveat that with saying if the issue is you go to treatment, like you start in Morgantown at the COAT program and you get kicked out of the COAT program or you don't comply with that, then you hop to a 28-day program, but you leave that after 2 weeks and you do not successfully complete that. And then you're out for a couple of weeks and then you go to another program and you spend 3 weeks there, but then you don't stay there. That's not going to help you. Like if you're bed hopping treatments, that's probably not going to be looked at by the court very favorably. But if it's only that you got kicked out of one program and then you immediately go to another, nobody's likely to hold that against you. But I've had people who go to probably literally every treatment program in the state, because they have issues with everyone for whatever reason. That's not going to be looked at favorably. But if you're consistently seeking treatment and you're making progress, and I guess another caveat of that, if you've got people at the treatment program who are willing to advocate for you and say they're doing the work, they're going to their treatment, they're compliant, they're a benefit to this program, the department and the court is going to work with you.
I think that's really helpful because a lot of the people in the audience are, affiliated with treatment programs, and so knowing that that can make a difference is good to know.
I agree with that, and I would say the sooner the better. The sooner you start that, and those 15 out of 22 months. If we have compelling reason not to seek termination of parental rights, we're going to advocate for our client that's doing what they need to be doing. So, I would have issue with workers under me wanting to seek termination if a parent has consistently remained in treatment. That's something that we would have a discussion about. But I don't see us in Mon County trying to seek termination of parental rights in situations where parents are in long-term treatment. We're doing everything we can to, be the cheerleader for them when we can. As far as incarceration goes, that's a little bit more difficult, but there are programs that parents can do while they're incarcerated. I think we've seen some success. I haven't had a ton of experience. And I think it gets to be more difficult when parents are incarcerated for long portions of time, rather than, a couple months in the case, but when they get out, they hit the ground running.
Yeah, in my case, that mine was a bit of an extreme case. The judge is really hard line where I'm from. He does things his own way. Uh, well, he's not the judge any longer, but at the time he was. And CPS actually advocated for them to wait for me to complete incarceration and get out, and then start the improvement period all over again and go that route. But the judge and the prosecution decided that that wasn't the route that they wanted to take. So, in my experience, it really is, and I've seen that happen in other places as well, not just with my case, but with the people that I serve. I've seen that happen with judges in certain areas. They're just like, well, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead and move to terminate your rights. So, in my experience, it really is, it really does vary from judge to judge.
And I want to say too, that can occur even within the same county. So, or the same judicial circuit. We have a lot of circuits in West Virginia where you have multiple judges in that circuit. I've worked in several, where what happens on one end of the hall and what happens on the other end of the hall are two very different things. And so I think when you're working with somebody going through this process and there can be a change with that. The best advice you can give them is to get to treatment early and to be consistent with it. Charity, I think what she said she did, that's an ideal situation. As soon as you're in the mud, start working to get yourself out. And I think most people, they need a lot of support. You guys know that probably well, far better than I do. But most people in that situation need the support, and they do feel, as you guys all know, that it's the whole system against them, when usually, in my experience, most CPS workers want to help people. They want to see them go to treatment. Nobody likes seeing kids in foster care. We all want to see reunification, and so it's just trying to help somebody in their unique situation. But like I said, with the difference between judges and circuits, it's really hard sometimes to give them good advice.
And we have a new judge in Mon County. So, I'm speaking on the experience that we've had in the years that I've been here, but things are still up in the air with how things are going to operate in that courtroom.
Charity, did you want to say something?
Yes. The only thing I wanted to add, I went straight in after a week, and I did a detox in a 28-day, and I thought about doing longer, but I did not want to be away from my daughters. That was a big deciding factor of not going to a 6 or 9 month and all that. And luckily I was able to do it, but that would be extremely hard. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I did a 28-day.
Yeah, that choice between.
Yeah, that was a hard decision. Maybe I wouldn't have had a relapse if I would have done it 6 months. Later on, maybe I would have. I can't say. Now, today, my recovery is really strong and I'm doing wonderful. I can't complain at all. But that decision is really hard for a parent. Really hard.
And I would note there are at least 2 programs that I'm aware of in the state that mothers, not fathers to my knowledge, but that mothers can go to for longer term treatment, where you can't take your kids with you when you go, but you can be reunified with your kids while you're in that program. The ones that I've worked with, I've had amazing success in those. And I think that is really probably an ideal treatment situation where somebody does have the possibility of having their child reunified with them while they're doing a long-term program, which I'm not in the medical field, but everything that I've read is that's the better outcome typically with long-term treatment.
Yeah, there, as far as I know, unless something has drastically changed very, very recently, there are no programs like that for men in this state. There are a couple for women, but there's nothing like that for men in this state who may be single fathers.
Yeah, just to share that resource, I don't know, PJ or Jennifer, if you want to put the names of those programs in the chat for people to see, that might be helpful if you know the names. So we've kind of touched on this question, and all the panelists got some these questions in advance, so they had time to think about them. But the idea that actually Jennifer brought up the lack of uniformity. So what are some of the problems that you guys have seen from your own experience in the system, whether it be the legal system or the CPS system, and what would be some potential improvements on those given funding limitations and staffing limitations, like working within the confines of those limitations? Like what would you guys think about how to improve the system?
I mean, some counties don't allow visitation until parents have a clean drug screen or have a clean drug screen for a period of time. That's not how our county operates. You know, visitation is in the child's best interest. Certainly if a parent shows up under the influence, we're going to stop that visit and reevaluate what's going on. But if they can be appropriate during a visitation, even if they're still in active addiction, we're going to allow visits to take place in a safe environment.
But again, like that lack of uniformity. Wow. Yeah.
Another issue that I think, and I think I said this the last time I was on the panel, that I would really like to have some definitive rules on, whether from the legislature or the Supreme Court, is medically assisted treatment and how it can affect or should not affect reunification. There are some counties that still restrict reunification if a parent is receiving medically assisted treatment. Monongalia County is not one of those. But I think that's a big question that needs to be asked and answered. Another one is with cannabis use. I know anecdotally there are a number of people who have used medical marijuana to help them with addiction recovery. I'm, again, not a medical expert, so I'm not going to opine on that. But in my experience in the system for a couple decades, I never had a case that I had to remove a child because of cannabis use. And I never had a child hurt because a parent was violent because of cannabis use. But we have a number of courts in the state that are not reunifying children with a parent if the parent has their medical cannabis card. And that's, it's all over the place. My guess is right now it's probably 50-50 on the counties that will allow a reunification and the ones that won't. So I think just stuff like that, things that are legal, medically assisted treatment, medical cannabis cards, we just need to have uniformity on how those issues are handled. And that's not only an issue in child protective services, it's also an issue in criminal justice system, with folks on probation or parole, whether or not they're allowed to use the things that are technically prescribed.
Yeah, I think in particular, the medical cannabis card is very confusing. I actually do know children or a child that's been removed because the child got into a vape pen that was a THC vape pen and was removed from the parents' custody because it was unsafe and they had to be hospitalized. So I'm gonna jump in as a panelist here. So in my experience, cannabis products can be very dangerous for children, especially if they get into them, and also for adults. We are seeing an increase in psychotic disorders associated with Delta-8 and cannabis products. There's a lack of regulation, although they're working on it. Certainly lack of regulation around products that are sold in the dispensaries. And it is not technically a medicine. So it is not an FDA approved medicine. So I really struggle with the medical card because it's kind of like calling alcohol a medicine. It may have some helpful effects for people, but it's not actually a medicine that is FDA approved for the kinds of things that people get the medical card for. So I think it leaves consumers who buy products left very confused, because on the one hand, it feels like they're being told this is a safe product to treat my anxiety with. And then in the medical field, most medical practitioners are like, well, not really.
Well, it's
So
not a
it's a bit
prescription.
confusing.
Like technically that card, it's a license to possess and use. It's not an FDA prescription, as you pointed out. And I think that's very confusing to people, because they're saying the judge is telling me I can't use my prescribed medication. And it's like, well, that's not really what that is.
Hey, confusing.
Um,
Um, so any other thoughts about kind of how to improve the system from your guys' perspective?
I
Whether
have a multitude of things, but I don't have all the
yeah,
answers. As somebody who worked in the system for a couple decades and is now a few months removed from it, and I feel like it's been kind of cleansing to not be with it every day. I feel like I have a little bit more of an objective place. I think the biggest problem is CPS is viewed in a very negative way by almost all players in and out of the system. And Child Protective Services workers, in my experience, are exceptionally kind-hearted. They're far overworked. They are exceptionally underpaid. And they're making, frankly, life or death decisions and on on a daily basis. Um, and I, I've seen CPS workers berated by judges in the same day that they're berated by attorneys and clients and social workers from various facilities. And we've put CPS in the position of really like making these major life decisions for people, with very little guidance. And there's CPS policy. And luckily, I've always, I've primarily worked in a county with a supervisor like Brianna, who is very smart and even-handed and uses common sense, but that's not always the case. And so I don't know how you fix that. But I feel like that's a major issue that CPS is put in the position of making decisions that frankly, a lot of times a judge should be put in the decision, put in the place of making. But that's not happening. My personal belief is that the court system needs to be reshuffled so that we have one specific court that only handles child abuse and neglect matters. So that you have far greater consistency and you have a judge and staff who are trained in child welfare and kind of cutting edge, belief and practice within the medical community and therapy community and things like that. But I don't, as of right now, that is nowhere on the horizon.
although family treatment courts, do you feel like those are potentially
Yeah, but so I think
county to county, but yeah.
yeah, they're great, but they're very few and far between right now. And also it's voluntary for the most part. So out of, if you've got the counties that I've seen that have utilized them, there's one in particular that I think is doing really great things with it. But if you've got 100 abuse and neglect cases, only 10 of those may be in the family treatment court. But I think it's a good model to work on and to think about expanding because the abuse neglect way, the way that it's been handled, that the idea of that came about because kids were being lost in the system and cases were being lost because they weren't getting to court often enough. And so we implemented time frames that, you had to be back in court at least every 3 months. And you had to have an MDT meeting at least every 3 months. And I think that that's helped. But when that was implemented before the opioid crisis. And I feel like the issues that we're seeing with families right now need more than once a month or once every 3 months check-ins with the decision makers. But I also understand that the system's overwhelmed and there's absolutely no way that we could put any more on the court's plate or CPS's plate. So, I'm very much of the belief that the system needs to be reformed.
I wanted to piggyback off that a little bit. I'm Colleen Lillard. I'm a clinical forensic psychologist. So I I see these cases I do parental fitness evaluations when the department is seeking to terminate parental rights due to a mental health or substance abuse reason. I also am I also work in forensic services, and so see mental illness and substance abuse from the other end of the criminal legal system. But I wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Jennifer was saying because I think that CPS, the problems that I see, that by the time I see a parent for parental fitness who has mental illness and or substance abuse issues, and they're talking about termination of rights, I'm often in a place to give recommendations, but the hard part is being able to find the services for those families. And so I feel like if CPS, a way to improve the system, and this is a big ask, is we've got to increase our community and intermediate level mental health services because I can make recommendations and but it may take 6 to 9 months to get in to see a psychiatrist or to get in to see a therapist. And then you're bumping up on those time frames that Brianna was talking about earlier for everybody. And I just find myself feeling frustrated for CPS because CPS becomes this like negative, all they're doing is removing children and they're not providing help to the parents in the way that I think that they could if those services were more readily available. And so I think it's this kind of catch-22 of like services aren't being provided to families to help improve the situation because they don't exist or they're really hard to attain. And I don't know how to better help that. I know there's a lot of money for substance abuse and it's great. And I'm very happy with the First Foundation and the opioid settlement money and the resources that we have. But I think we have to make sure we don't forget severe mental illness in there as well. And we need to start working on some of our intermediate services in that regard.
Can I jump off that? Because I totally agree with you, Colleen. And I think that that was so nicely put. Like I was trying to organize my thoughts to put that. But I think it was so nicely put. I totally agree that we need to increase and support CPS because I do see CPS becoming that target at times. And while sometimes it's helpful for parents to kind of get that frustration out, but helping them refocus and reframe that this is a support, right? And supporting CPS with those services. And I think that you're right. We have a lot of state opiate response money, but very little going to supporting family treatment. And I think that, family therapy is so highly recommended and effective for substance use disorder, but not readily available. And not many people are trained to do that. And how many families need that to reorganize that system? And I thought of that, Jennifer, when you were talking about families doing everything they need to, parents doing everything they need to, and then maybe the child's treatment isn't where it needs to be reunified. But how many times are we engaging the family in that when it's appropriate, right? I get it. There's trauma treatment where it's not appropriate to re-engage the family, but so much of that treatment could be engaging that family, and that's not happening either because, again, we don't have those providers that can do that. So yeah, I agree with Colleen.
Yeah, I wanted to share actually a positive story. We were going to have we had multiple panelists in mind, and one of the folks who couldn't make it was a young woman who is about to kind of get reunified, and her foster parent, the foster parent who has her baby, began to have contact with her about halfway through the foster care placement. And I don't know if this was sort of approved by CPS or encouraged or they figured this out on their own, but it has made such a difference to that mom and frankly, probably to the child and foster parent. She feels connected. She doesn't feel like it's me versus the foster parent and we're at odds with each other. And I think it will facilitate the reunification in a way that like even family therapy might not be able to do because the foster parent sends her pictures. And I mean, it just does casual contact to help the mother still feel engaged with that baby. And it ultimately helps with attachment and preventing trauma to that attachment bond. So that's been a really nice thing to see happen with that particular family. Sorry, someone else was about to say something.
Yeah, I just if some of you guys remember, I did a presentation like I think last month maybe about connecting peer support and CPS, and I think that would help relieve a lot of some of the burden from these CPS workers trying to connect these individuals with all these different services that they need. Because that's a big part of our job is, we're like resource brokers. We connect people with the services that they need, whatever those may be, whether it's substance use, mental health, family help, whatever the case might be. Um, and also, as a side note, in the state of West Virginia, there is also, starting in 2025, there's also going to be a mental health peer certification uh, for peers such as myself to support people with strictly mental health issues. It doesn't have to be issues related. Um, I'm currently working on getting mine. Just a little side note, but uh, I really think that that extra connection to individuals who have been through this process and have, like myself, learned the hardest way possible how to navigate these things can be really beneficial to other people. And help keep them on, for lack of a better term, help keep them on track. Like not only with their recovery plan, because we help build recovery plans for people, but with all of the other things that they need to do also. We can help them with learning how to balance a checkbook, learning how to fill out job applications, how to write resumes. These are all things that we do as peer recovery support specialists to help the individuals that we serve.
Housing, because
And
that could be a barrier to reunification if someone doesn't have stable housing too. Yeah.
yes, and I really think that would be super beneficial.
PJ, how, at this point in time, how would a CPS supervisor or CPS workers best get connected with peer support for any of their families?
I think the best way for now would be to contact an agency that provides peer support in that area and sort of
Usually community
work
mental
out
health centers, right?
what's that?
Would that usually be the comprehensive community mental health center?
Yes. Or treatment facilities. Some sober livings have peer recovery support specialists attached to them a lot of times. Treatment facilities, licensed behavioral health centers. Um, but the best way for now, I think, would be to contact one of those places in your area and say, "Hey, do you guys have peers that can help us to connect these individuals?"
Can I chime in? So the Drug-Free Moms and Babies program is 20, maybe 20 plus sites across the state of West Virginia. We are pretty much at most of the birthing hospitals now. And that's exactly what we do. We try to get our participants in while they're pregnant. We work with people up to 2 years with them and their kids, and each one of the sites is a little bit different. I'm in Morgantown, and so I'm also a peer recovery support specialist. But we also have coordinators. So our sites are set up. When I speak to our participants, I always tell them, you tell me what you need and we will help you to get it, because I can't tell you all the things that we help people with. It is really, really, based on that individual. But one of the things I would really love to see, and so many of our sites have said this as well, that we would like to be able to work with CPS. We would like to be able to, to feel like that, we could help to make sure that that person has all the resources that CPS wants them to have, because we do have a lot of resources at our hands. So Um, that's also something that's out there. So
Thank you, Candy. Absolutely, and continues to expand. I think the drug-free moms and babies maybe did get some West Virginia First Foundation monies, and so these resources should be expanding around the state.
yes, yes.
Any other comments from the group or questions for our panel from the group?
Yes, I had a comment. Like PJ, I completely agree with that. We need to have peers and CPS work together from the beginning, because I know when they came in and removed, they didn't give me no resources of where to go for treatment, what to do. Just said you need to go to treatment, and that's not enough for some people. Like they need a helping hand, and I feel that peers could be that helping hand. So, 100% agree.
Thanks, Charity. I feel like we have a lot of expertise in the Zoom room. So any questions for the group? Any other questions for the group? Comments? Being a strengths-based person, I usually like to wrap up with some general positivity around for people who have had experience with CPS. Anything that you feel like CPS is doing well or that you've seen improve over the years?
I mean, I think they've made significant improvements, uh, even in since the time that my CPS case happened, which was several years ago. They've made significant improvements in allowing people to be on medication assisted treatment and still get reunified with their kids. The judge where I came from, that wasn't a thing, that wasn't allowed in his court. Um, for people to be on medication assisted treatment and get reunified with their children. So I think some really good strides have been made with that.
And I would echo like from the beginning, so from the time that the baby is in the hospital and CPS is notified and come to assess mom and baby while in the hospital. There used to be that a case got opened fairly frequently, and now that's not necessarily the case. So that's definitely been a positive change as well. They really assess the parent based on their stability and their ability to care for their child, not just whether or not they were on medicine.
And I have to say, I definitely see an increase of parents reporting relationship building with their CPS worker. And I think that that's a big shift because I feel like that definitely encourages trust. And so I think sometimes CPS is the gatekeeper for us with mental health. And, they come across people's needs sometimes before we do. And so I think those relationships are so significant in moving forward with future treatment and trusting future providers. So I think that that can be really beneficial. But I come from a strength-based approach too. So I love this whole discussion. I feel like I loved hearing different perspectives. Like I think, everybody has a lens they come from and hearing those different perspectives. But, I think of one of the themes being like building that collaboration and support with CPS. And, I just think of how hard it is sometimes to collaborate and take time. I mean, we are all strapped for time. And like, I feel like that seems like such a simple piece, but it's so hard too. So like, how can we do that, right? We're solving world problems.
Well, I really wanted to especially thank our panelists, Bree and Jennifer and Charity and PJ. It's not easy to come on and share your perspective, but I appreciate you all being here today with everybody. Thank you.